Hey, so today I'm going to be talking about the concept of the other. It's a word you've heard before, obviously, but we're going to be talking about a new meaning from the field of sociology. Sociology is the study of society. But before we get into the meaning of the word itself, we're going to do a visualization exercise. So think of a random person on the street. Just a random person on the street. Really picture that person. Do you have a picture? I'm going to ask some questions about that person, and I don't want you to change your answer because you're overthinking it. Keep it simple. The first thing that you thought of when I said a person on the street. Think about it without any judgment. It's just a question. There's no meaning behind it. What is the race of the person you pictured? What's the gender of the person that you pictured? What kind of clothing are they wearing? What kind of hair do they have? Roughly how old is your person? Like, is it a child, a teenager, somebody in their 20s, maybe 30s or 40s, older than 50? Now, if you had to answer some questions about your person, and again, this isn't a real person, it's a hypothetical person, but if you had to take some guesses, would you say that your person is right-handed or left-handed? What kind of job does your person work? What kind of family structure do they have? Are they married? Any kids? Were they adopted? Did they grow up in a single-parent household or with both parents? Are they a cat person or a dog person? On an average Sunday, what is your person doing? Is your person religious? So, I obviously can't hear your response, but when you ask most people to answer these questions, most people will do one of two different things. Either one, they will describe somebody who is similar to themselves. Or the other thing that they'll do, and this is actually what most people do if you ask these questions, most people will describe a hypothetical person who's kind of a collaboration of a whole bunch of societal norms. Now, a societal norm means norm like normal. So a societal norm is whatever is considered standard for a particular society. Our society meaning like the United States of America or even Georgia in our specific case. So most people in the United States, when you ask all these questions, will think of a person who is white. They will usually think of a man and somebody with either brown or blonde or maybe black hair, almost never red hair, almost never, and also very rarely dyed some bright color. Nobody ever thinks of somebody with blue hair. The person that they think of usually doesn't have any type of physical disability. If I say a person on the street, most people don't picture somebody in a wheelchair or somebody with a guide dog or someone with a prosthetic limb. Most people would assume that this hypothetical person is straight. So if it was a man, they assume that this man is attracted to women, maybe has a wife, maybe 2 or 3 kids. We generally assume that they're a dog person. We generally assume right-handed. So all of these things, and there are so many more, all of these things are social norms. And sometimes a norm can mean the majority of people in a society. For example, like with race, if you pictured a white person, there are more white people in the United States of America than there are people of other races. However, it's not always about the biggest population, because most people will think of a man. However, there are more women than there are men, both in the United States and globally. Women are about 51% of the population and men are about 49%. So there are actually more women, yet we think of a man. If I just showed you a stick figure and didn't tell you anything about the stick figure, most people would assume that that stick figure was male if I asked them to give it a gender. And that's because it's not about what actually has the biggest population. It's not about what is the most. It's about what we are taught is normal. And I would like to take this moment to say that, again, there's no judgment here. If you thought of a white man who is straight and who is Christian and who is right-handed with no disabilities, there is no judgment to that. Or if you thought of something different, that's also fine. The study of sociology, like I said, this is a subject that studies society as a whole. It doesn't even really deal with us as individual people, but rather how we make up a large society. And it certainly does not judge us for our own personal opinions or even for society's opinions. So this is just something that is noticed, that most people, our default is a white man, Christian, straight, not disabled, all of those things that we listed before. All of that is just a big collection of what we think of as social norms, what society has told us is standard. We see it in books all the time. We see it in TV shows and movies. Body type is a big one that I forgot to mention before. Either an average build, maybe a little bit on the slender side, is what we think of as normal. Whether or not what we think of as normal is actually the real normal when you look at the numbers in society. So societal norms are more about an imagined truth that is told to us by society. So those are all some societal norms. And then in opposition to those norms, you have what's called the other. And that's really what I want to talk about, is the concept of the other. And like I said before, we have all heard the word other before. It means something else. And that's more or less what it means here too. So like I said, here we go. We've got our list of things that are taught to us as the default. And then everything else that isn't that default, everything else is called the other. And it's not necessarily good or bad to be an other. It can be, particularly if you get really deep into sociology. When you go further down that track, there can be some good and some bad stuff there. But just to be an other, or to have an identity that is another, it's okay. So some things that might be considered other. So we said, I'm going to move the camera so you can see me. There we go. We said to be male or to be a man is considered the norm, even though there are fewer men than women. That would make women the other. We said that white is the societal norm. So that would make all other races that are not white an other, particularly in our society in the United States. So Black people, Asian people, Native Americans, Latino or Hispanic people, any other race, all of those are considered the other. Body type, again, is a big one. So we think of average build or even a little bit on the slender side. So being overweight or obese is very much an othered identity. But even being too skinny can be othered. If clothing is a big one, name brands like American Eagle, Aeropostale, Nike is a big one. All of these things are normed in our society. They are the normal, they are the default. We see it all the time in society, in media, TV, movies, all of that. So clothing that might be othered in our society, like long skirts might be something othered. It's not something that we see as much in TV. It's not something that we would think of as the default. When you pictured that person on the street, most people pictured somebody in pants and a shirt, maybe shorts and a shirt, but definitely not a skirt, probably not a dress. With regards to more religious clothing, most people don't think of a nun's habit or a rabbi's garb or if you're familiar with the hijab that Muslim women wear, that headscarf that covers their hair, most people don't think of that. Bright, outlandish clothing, most people don't think of. The clothes from like robes from Assassin's Creed or Victorian era clothing is othered. It's not the societal norm. It's not what you would think of when I say a person on the street. So it's othered. Left-handed people, othered. Cat people, actually. Cat people can be othered. There's a whole bunch more. LGBTQ. Big one is LGBTQ. So lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender, anything on that spectrum, very much othered. We think of straight people and cisgender people. Cisgender is the opposite of transgender. Those people are normed. It's what we think of as the standard. When you think of a person on the street, that is what you think. I hope that was enough of an explanation. I wanted to start on a society level so we can have a concept of our norms in our society and our others in society. But really specifically, I want to talk about how the term other applies to literature. So we use the term other in literature a lot because in real life, people are just born the way they're born and there's no meaning to it. But in a story, in a book or in a TV show or in a movie, people don't just happen to exist. They are created to be a certain way for a certain reason. So in media, if an author or a director, a writer, has created a character who is othered in some way or in multiple ways, the author is probably trying to do something with that, and there are a lot of things that we can do with that an author can do with that. It doesn't just mean one specific thing, but it's just the concept of the other is something that we should be keeping in mind while we're reading. And if we notice a character who is othered, we should be keeping an eye on that character. Both in media and also in real life, a lot of people who are othered in some way, left-handed, cat people, LGBTQ, women, people of color, all of those identities, or anybody who fits into any of those identities, are oftentimes treated differently in society, usually in very subtle ways, and almost always unintentionally. Nobody or very few people are intentionally treating people differently just because they're different from them. Nobody does that or very few people do that on purpose, but it does wind up happening in small, subtle ways that we're not always aware of and that we don't mean. And that happens both in real life and also in literature. So particularly in literature, if a character is othered and you really start to look at that character, you might notice all of the other characters treating that character differently, or maybe they're doing something that makes them stand out. We are going to have a journal entry. You're going to want to check Google Classroom for the journal entry for how that can specifically relate to Lord of the Flies. I will give you a hint. The big obvious character from Lord of the Flies who is othered is Piggy, for a couple different reasons. You can go through that and look at Piggy and see why. But there are some other boys from Lord of the Flies who are othered in their own ways, much smaller, much more subtle ways. And if you can really start thinking about the concept of the other and what it means to be different from the societal norm, you might start to pick up on that. Similarly, I have another video on this YouTube channel about the other in Disney movies. A lot of times, characters that are the other are often portrayed as the villains or as antagonists. Remember, there's a difference between a villain and an antagonist. But a lot of times in books, TV, movies, that antagonist or that villain is going to be somebody who is othered. I want you to take a look at that clip that I put in YouTube and look for the common denominator among the 4 different Disney villains that I have picked out and think about how are those Disney villains othered.